Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. It is Combine week, and we are gearing up even further. There's been some college bowls and other pre-draft processes that have come and gone, but the NFL Combine is here, and that's probably one of, if not the biggest, pre-draft processes that we have to go through. And we have a very special guest to talk about that. Before we get to her, I am with my co-host, Scott Schulte. Scott, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. It is, I dressed for the occasion. I got my tropical shirt on because it's a heat wave. It's up in the 40s here in Ohio, and we got a special guest. So I wanted to dress up, with some buttons and, something little. So yeah, things are good.
Good. Well, I want to welcome in Rebecca Toback, who should be a familiar name to Cincy Jungle readers. She has since had a nice promotion with SB Nation. She is live outside in Indianapolis. You can hear her. And she's been doing she had an interesting day on Wednesday at the NFL Combine. First of all, Rebecca, officially congratulations on the promotion. And how's Indianapolis treating you?
Oh, thank you. It's treating me very well. It's actually raining right now, so I'm standing outside in the rain to talk to you guys, but it's well worth it to make an appearance on the podcast.
Well, appreciate it. Hopefully you're staying dry. And we said before we went on the air, it's kind of a big party scene. So hopefully you're having some fun out there instead of all work, right? A little bit of play with work, right?
Yes, we're actually at trivia night, which we showed up, and coincidentally it was trivia night. So one of the questions was actually what team fired John Fox this season? So we were like, yes, we got one NFL question.
Nice. Well, I'm glad to hear you're having a little bit of fun, and thanks again for carving out a little bit of time for us. I want to start off, I guess it's kind of Bengals related, but it's more of a prospect related type of question. Quentin Nelson, the guard out of Notre Dame, one of the highest rated prospects in the draft this year, weighed in and measured in. Everybody knew he was a guard. All of a sudden, wingspan, hand size, all this stuff. He almost measures as a tackle. He has a great skill set. What's the buzz about, and did Duke Tobin talk about him at all?
Yeah, so this morning Duke Tobin spoke to the media, and we're going to hear from Marvin Lewis later in the week. But one of the most interesting things that Tobin spoke about was Quentin Nelson and that how highly he is regarded. A lot of people are considering him the top prospect in the draft, which is kind of crazy to think that a guard might be the top prospect. So I think the Bengals are definitely interested in him, but I don't really think he's going to make it to pick number 12. But Duke Tobin did say that he thinks he could actually play all 5 offensive line positions, and he was very high on him. So I don't know if switching him away from guard to tackle is actually in the books for him, but it definitely makes him more versatile and of interest to teams like the Bengals.
Very interesting that he said he could play all 5 positions. I wouldn't have expected him to say that. Your probably your biggest takeaway, well, I guess for Bengals fans, their biggest takeaway were comments that Duke Tobin had made about Russell Bodine. Obviously a guy who is very polarizing, and the Bengals front office, the Bengals coaches seem to be in his corner, at least publicly, and fans are not. National media who watch tape are not. So what was kind of the takeaway from Tobin's comments today?
The takeaway was essentially, Tobin spoke a lot about reflecting on Pete Brown, who passed away late last year and was, is Mike Brown's brother, and so he was a big part of the Bengals. He was the head of the scouting department. So there are definitely going to be a lot of changes with the scouting department, but with him now passed away. But he kind of reflected on something that he would say, which is the best ability is availability. And I mean, that's 100% true about Russell Bodine. He has never missed a game, even when he got hurt this year and everyone was like, he should miss 2 to 3 weeks at least because of this injury. He didn't miss a second. He came back right away. So I think the problem is that Bodine should be re-signed, but he shouldn't be re-signed with the intention of being a starter. And knowing what we know about the Bengals, they will re-sign him with full intention of him continuing to keep his job. So I think everything so far that Duke Tobin said today and that Marvin Lewis has said since the season ended is consistent with the Bengals 100% wanting to re-sign Russell Bodine. And I mean, yeah, that's not going to be a popular decision among fans if that actually happens. Marvin Lewis has said that he says he wants to stay and they say they want him back. So I think the problem is really that he doesn't deserve to not have to compete for a starting job. And as of now, all indications point to him having no problem keeping his starting job, even if he doesn't deserve it. So far, all signs point to him returning.
Okay, so I guess you're giving us Bengals fans negative news. So I'm going to try to see if I can spin it and maybe get some positive news out of this. And I'm going to, I guess, ask a question that is also very polarizing. But Andy Dalton's kind of near the end. Well, not near the end, but he's getting up there in years. He's kind of proven he is who he is and who he's not. Yeah. We know that A.J. McCarron's probably gone. Jeff Driscoll's injured. Has there been any sort of sense at all that they might possibly look at a quarterback this year as far as if one of these supposed great prospects falls to them, or is that just something that's totally out of the cards for them?
So there was a lot of Andy Dalton talk today, mostly because there was so much talk about A.J. McCarron and what went wrong there. But Duke Tobin said, I'm not joking, at least 5 times, probably more like 10 times, that he highly values Andy Dalton and that Andy Dalton is a top quarterback in the NFL. No joke, he said it at least 5 times, those exact words. He said that Andy Dalton has proven himself. He's proven he can be a top quarterback. He had issues this year, or last season, but that he thinks that the Bengals just need to surround him with better talent and better pass protection and a better run game. So all indications pointed to him being the starting quarterback at least in 2018. Towards the end of the discussion with Duke Tobin this morning, someone asked, is it possible that the Bengals draft a quarterback with the number 12 pick? Because Marvin Lewis last year said that there was 0 chance the Bengals would draft a quarterback with the number 9 pick. And he said he wouldn't rule it out, but again, then just said, we really value Andy Dalton. So he said that he wouldn't make any bold predictions about the draft, and that if a prospect fell to them who they felt was a good value pick, that they would obviously have to consider it. But in reality, it really didn't sound like the Bengals were going to be drafting a high round quarterback.
Well, it's interesting you say they want better blocking, but yet you just said before that they're keeping Bodine. So it'd be interesting to see what happened. I know you're in the rain, so I will throw one last question at you before I toss it back over to Anthony. And this one's a little off the wall. Whenever fans, people who don't go to Indianapolis for the Combine, we watch it on TV or the draft, and they review the Combine tapes and the things they showed us in the Combine. You hear these kind of bizarre phrases like, this guy has sand in his pants, he works well in a phone booth, etc. I guess just a 2-part question. First one, does anyone actually talk like that at the Combine? And secondly, if they do, what is your favorite just bizarre Combine saying?
Okay, well, I would say I didn't hear too many crazy things yet on the first day. I mean, Hugh Jackson did throw some like ridiculous things out there, but I feel like no one actually said one of those like ridiculous sayings that like people talk about, like that they're like I don't know, I don't even know what they say, like freakishly athletic or like fast but not speedy. I don't even know, but
twitchy,
I feel like, yeah. No, as of day one, no, I haven't heard anything like that. I do think that we did like a drinking game for the draft on Cincy Jungle like 2 years ago with like all those kinds of like things. I'm trying to remember some of them, but I don't know. I don't know if I could give you my favorite. I'll have to think about it and comment on the podcast later with my answer.
Yeah, Mike Mayock's got a couple of funny ones from what I remember too. We're talking with Rebecca Toback with SB Nation, and she still does quite a bit of stuff with Cincy Jungle. She is in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, kind enough to take a couple of minutes out of her fun evening in Indianapolis to talk about her first day at the Combine. I guess one quick question I have. There was something you had something Duke Tobin had talked about in terms of technology. But when I read the, and by the way, to our listeners, all of this information and posts are on cincyjungle.com, written by Rebecca, so you can check those out. But in technology, it wasn't so much it was more video editing. It was more being able to kind of get information quicker, but it wasn't the data analytics stuff. Was there any talk about the data analytics, kind of that new movement that's kind of making its way into the NFL?
Okay, so this was probably one of the funniest things that happened today. Jon Gruden was one of the first coaches to talk this morning to the media, so there was like a huge crowd trying to gather around him, obviously as like a new or returning head coach, and he talked for like a solid 5 minutes about how he's going to refuse to use any of the new technology at his disposal, and how he's going to like act like it's 1993 and not use any GPS technology or any of like the chips that the NFL is putting into players' pads. Wow. And any of that. And it was just like incredibly funny because like this is where the NFL is moving, and like he's coming back and pretending like he never left and is just like picking up where he left off, and yet it's been like 15 plus years since he's been a coach in the NFL, and that's just like not really gonna work. So I think that was one of the like most absurd things that happened today, and everyone is now just like wondering how the Raiders are possibly going to survive with like that kind of mentality from their head coach. And he did say that he'd like leave that kind of stuff to other people who are more, I guess, hip with the technology. Mm-hmm. But I definitely recommend watching that interview if you can, because it was just hysterical, and he says he's going to refuse to use technology. No one else really spoke about that today, and Duke Tobin didn't talk about it at all, but that was one of the interesting takeaways of the day.
Old Chucky. Yes. He's got to remain old school. Last question for you, Rebecca, so you can go back and enjoy some trivia and hopefully a couple of adult beverages. Just kind of a general air. I know it's kind of one interview time with Duke Tobin. This has been an off season where Bengals fans maybe aren't very stoked about things. Marvin Lewis is back. They're, maybe not making a change at quarterback. We don't know what they're going to do in free agency. We don't know if Tyler Eifert's going to be back. There's kind of a blah feeling. Now, did that permeate through the interview with Duke Tobin, or was there a sense of optimism and maybe some of these vague changes that we've heard being referenced? Will those maybe take place just based on the interview you heard with him today?
I so badly want to tell you that there was optimism and things to be excited about, but I really don't feel like there was.
Oh boy. Okay.
Because most of the interview was talking about what happened with AJ McCarron, that Andy Dalton is a top quarterback in the NFL, that they don't know if they're going to re-sign Tyler Eifert, that they do want to re-sign Russell Bodine. So it's just all of the things that fans are pissed off about were just accentuated in the 30 to 45 minutes that we spoke to him. So I'm trying to think if there was they did talk about the potential to sign free agents a little bit. They did talk about how we're going to improve the offensive line and that they're going to have 5 starting quality offensive linemen. So there's, if you want to dig deep for hope, there were little glimmers of it, but the large majority of the time spent was really reflecting on all the things that fans are already mad about and probably will just be more mad about after hearing all of this.
Yeah, and I guess the one other thing is he talked about the 11 picks and how they might move up. I saw that, but really, I didn't see much on the surface either, so that's why I was asking you about it.
Here's one little thing. So Duke Tobin talked about Jake Elliott, and I asked him about Jake Elliott and his thoughts on if the situation there would deter him deter the Bengals from selecting another kicker in the draft, because that was the first kicker the Bengals selected under Marvin Lewis, and he obviously did not work for them. So yet he's a Super Bowl winner.
Yeah.
He said that the Bengals would consider drafting another kicker. And I do think that offers a little bit of hope, because in the article that I wrote about this, I compared it to how in the past, when the Bengals have failed at something, they've just completely bailed at ever trying to repeat that type of thing. So like signing a big name free agent, they went after Antonio Bryant, that failed miserably, and then not Antonio Bryant, what's his name? I don't know. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Terrell Owens?
No.
No, I thought it was Bryant.
It was Bryant, right? Yeah, okay. So they went after Antonio Bryant. The whole situation failed miserably. He was cut before training camp. And then since that happened, they've never gone after another big name free agent again. They've never spent a lot of money on a free agent again. So that's the kind of thing they do. Like, they fail at something, they never try it again. So I thought that him saying that even though they failed with Jake Elliott and that they would still consider drafting a kicker again, I thought that offered a little bit of hope from them, like, shying away from the conservative things that they've become used to and, like, taking a leap of faith when they need to do that.
Gotcha.
So that would be my one little glimmer of hope from today.
Well, I like it. We'll see. I mean, they've been playing things close to the vest, and there's talk of change. We'll see if that actually happens. Rebecca, thanks for your time. Again, it's Rebecca Toback with SB Nation and CincyJungle.com. You can find all of this stuff on her Twitter handle at Rebecca Toback. Any other places they can find your stuff, Rebecca, so people can keep updated?
You can stay tuned on the Cincy Jungle Facebook. We're going to be doing a lot of Facebook Lives during the week, and those will all be on the SB Nation NFL Facebook page too, but you can find them on Cincy Jungle for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for the time. Go have some fun tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
So again, Rebecca Toback with SB Nation joining us from Indianapolis to talk about the Combine. That was a lot of fun, and that was kind of her to step outside in the weather, braving the elements to talk to us, both traffic and rain, but good stuff. And she has a lot of the video clips of her interview with Duke Tobin and the media's interview with Duke Tobin. So pretty interesting stuff. And Scott, I really liked your question about the favorite saying. That was I got to think of mine. There's a lot of goofy ones that people cling to, Yeah,
I've always found that interesting because it just seems like almost like he's and it's mostly Mayock, but I think they all kind of do. They're inventing a language to, I don't know, sound more important, or I don't know. It's kind of an odd way of talking about. Why not just say a guy, blocks well instead of he works well in a phone booth, or he's got sand in his pants, or he's got flags and a motor, and he's twitchy, or a lot of the different things. And there was a post, I think last year, 2 years ago, I wrote where it basically listed kind of like the top 10 or 20, and then had the readers from Cincy Jungle vote for what their favorite, just kind of oddball, phrase you would never use in the real world, but you would hear, on draft day, especially in the Combine, because the Combine's essentially, 5 days of guys running and jumping. And you've got to find some way to make that entertaining, because you don't know if your team's going to draft any of them. So
and they're running and jumping in spandex and tight outfits, and and these analysts are talking about body types and all kinds of weird things. So it's kind of it's interesting how popular this event is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like baseball, that there's not a ton happening, but but the announcers have to find a way to keep you engaged and keep you entertained. And we'll make up words, and we will talk about, the same three things this guy did, in college over and over and over until the next guy runs. And then there are the interesting stories, like when last year, when I think it was Reuben Foster, the linebacker from Alabama, when he diluted his drug sample and then got all pissed off when they called him out on it, and he left. And a few years before that, there was the running back who said that God told him in a vision to leave the Combine. He was going to play for the Seahawks, and no idea what ever happened to him. And then Andre Smith obviously left back, I think it was 2009, when he showed up out of shape, which was a precursor to showing up in training camp out of shape. But yeah, there are some interesting stories.
Yes. Well, good stuff from Rebecca. And this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Again, I'm with my co-host, Scott Schultze. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this program in a number of different mediums: SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes. We're on cincyjungle.com, and you can get in touch with the program via email, theobinsider@gmail.com, or via Twitter at Bengals OBI. So send your questions, comments, all of that stuff to either one of those mediums, and we will try and get to those. We are planning to get to some listener questions at the end of the show here. But big thanks to Rebecca for showing up and taking her free time, the time she's not working at the Combine, to come onto the program and talk about this. Scott, let's transition a little bit. This wasn't discussed really with Duke Tobin too much, but there's been a lot of conflicting information on Tyler Eifert. And we've talked about this a little bit on the program. I think we've had some listeners ask us about it, should they resign him and all that stuff. And that's part of the question. But I want to kind of update. There's been some recent information or recent stuff put out by Jeff Hobson of Bengals.com. And essentially, it had said that the Bengals were more interested in potentially re-signing Tyler Croft, or extending Tyler Croft, who was in the last year of his rookie deal, instead of giving
Eifert.
Tyler Eifert. Yes, thank you, Tyler Eifert a deal. I was looking for the exact quote, but it was something to the effect of there are people in the building, meaning the Paul Brown Stadium, that would rather see the team re-sign Tyler Croft instead of give Tyler Eifert a contract. Now, I don't know if that means, what kind of contract that means that would be offered to Tyler Eifert, and if that's what the issue is, or simply if it's Eifert missing so much time. But there's a lot of prongs to this situation, and one of them is the draft and develop strategy that the Bengals employ, and they really, that's their bread and butter. But, you're letting a first-round pick walk out the door. Yes, he's had injuries, but when he's there, he's very effective. The other is the injuries and lack of production. He played 2 games last year, was not a factor, and he has not been a factor since 2015, and he was outstanding that year. But, I don't know what to make of this. I guess the first part of the question I want to ask you, Scott, about your opinion on is, do you believe that the Bengals would rather re-sign Croft over Eifert? And do you think, if so, do you think that has something to do with Eifert wanting maybe a bigger deal than they are willing to give, or is it just they want to cut bait because he's not available?
I guess this is a very interesting question between these two guys, because if you look at who they are, they're very different very different tight ends. Without a doubt, Eifert is the better talent. He's the better wide receiver. Better receiving tight end. He can do things that when you watch him back in 15, you're like, man, this guy's, the way he gets open, the way he, can get away from safeties, the way he can, catch in the end zone. He's an elite tight end. The problem is, he's not healthy. You mentioned the 2 games last year. He's had 10 games the last 2 years. In 5 seasons, he's played less than half of the possible games he could have played. And that's a problem. And I understand the Bengals' reluctance to sign a guy when his track record says, hey, I've played 10 out of the last 32 games and only 39 games out of 80. Eifert already has less games than Croft does in two more years. So it's definitely a telling thing. Although when you look at the numbers, there's no way to sugarcoat that Eifert is by far the better player. His, yards per game, receptions per game, touch, whatever, are each year have been better than anything Croft's ever done. But, with Croft, you get a guy who's going to be healthy and play on the field. So I think the big thing is, what kind of contract are you looking at? If Eifert wants a, Gronk, Jimmy Graham, even what Julius Thomas got a couple years ago down in Florida. And, if he wants that kind of money, like top 5 tight end, like a Travis Kelce, I can see the Bengals saying, no way, and not giving it to him. They've let some of their better free agents go in the past, such as Eric Steinbach and Kevin Zeitler and Jonathan Joseph, so forth. And, I could see them saying we just don't want to do that because this guy can't stay on the field, and it's always a different thing. It's not like it's this one reoccurring thing you can hope to fix. It's just, it's this part of his body, then this part, then this part, and it's just like he's breaking down. That being said, if they want to extend Croft, you would kind of hope it's not going to be something like that. You hope it's kind of a $4 million, $5 million, somewhere where he's going to be paid, in the 20 to 30 range, 15 to 30 range as far as tight ends. You would hope to get Eifert for that, because if there's a hometown discount, I don't know if he would offer that. I'm sure the Bengals would probably try to go that direction, kind of like people assume happened with Whitworth last year when he ran and took the money in Los Angeles. So yeah, I think it all depends on what kind of contract the players, or what they think Eifert wants, or what Eifert has maybe said he wants. If it's just a matter of giving them the same contract, something like a low run, like a 1 year prove it or something, I'd be very surprised that they would want to get rid of Eifert just for the sheer fact of getting rid of him. I would hope the only reason they wouldn't sign him is if he wants a huge amount of money that he's worth when he's healthy, but just isn't healthy enough to really warrant that amount of money.
Yeah. I mean, you'd hate to see just them cut ties with a former first-round pick, former Pro Bowler, just because. But, so Croft was second in the team last year with 7 touchdown catches and was a nice red zone weapon. Tyler Eifert is one of the best red zone weapons in all of football when he's healthy. We've seen it. I go back to 2015. Okay, and yes, the offensive line was much better than this current group is just 2 years later, 3 years later, I guess now. But when you looked at 2014 Andy Dalton to 2015 Andy Dalton, when he had healthy A.J. Green, healthy Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill, healthy Marvin Jones, healthy Tyler Eifert, healthy Mohamed Sanu, a lot of those guys that he did not have. All of a sudden, there's, potentially, you don't want to hang your hat on it necessarily, but you have Tyler Eifert back. Supposedly, he's going to be ready for OTAs. He was cleared for it recently, in case you missed that bit of news. You have healthy Tyler Eifert, hopefully. Healthy A.J. Green. You supposedly are going to have a healthy John Ross. Brandon LaFell is scheduled to be back. You have Josh Malone, who did. So my point is if the Bengals do some things on the offensive line as they claim that they're probably going to do, we heard that from Rebecca earlier in the program, all of a sudden now Andy Dalton has his plethora of healthy weapons. Now, I agree with you, Scott, in the respect of I don't think you can give Tyler Eifert some mega 4 or 5 year deal where, it's a Jimmy Graham type of thing. It's a Gronkowski type of contract. Yes, he's up in that echelon when he's healthy, but that's not a wise business decision. But I also think that it's not a wise business decision to let him go. I would not be opposed to the Bengals slightly overpaying for Tyler Eifert. I would not be opposed to the Bengals using the franchise tag on him to lock him up for 1 year, especially if they do a lot of things this year to help their team and they feel that, hey, they apparently feel they're close to the playoffs again. I don't necessarily know if I believe it as we sit here in going into March, but they believe they're close. And I think if you overpay a little bit for 1 year, the Bengals are always under the salary cap every year. I don't think it's a bad move to franchise tag Tyler Eifert. And the last time they used a franchise tag on a kind of expensive player, it was Michael Johnson. He had a big year, 11.5 sacks, and then he followed it up with like 3 sacks, and then they let him walk in free agency the next year. They said, you know what, that didn't work out. I'm not opposed to the Bengals spending a bit of money on, quite a bit of money on Tyler Eifert and using the franchise tag to, keep him for 1 year. That's kind of a trial basis, is it not?
Yeah, and I think it also protects you because, you obviously hope you don't get into the Kirk Cousins thing where you franchise him, ad nauseum. But yeah, the franchise thing is a way to keep him from walking. It's a way that, hey, if he is healthy, it's a chance to see what he can do. And like you said, they're always under the salary cap. They always seem to have a lot of extra money. And it's interesting you mentioned the Michael Johnson thing, because that one worked out really well. They actually tried to give him a big extension. He turned it down. They gave it to Carlos Dunlap, and that ended up looking like a great move to lock up Dunlap instead of Johnson, because then Johnson left, went to Tampa Bay, wasn't very good, came back, and we got him much cheaper. So we ended up with both of them anyway for a lot cheaper than we would have had Johnson taken the deal. But yeah, I would agree. That would be a great way to get him locked up. I don't know who else they would really look to use it on, because if you look at the pending free agents next year, guys they kind of have coming up, you need to extend. Yeah, someone like him and Croft, they both hit free agency after this season, or after this upcoming season, and then you have like some secondary depth, and then your line. But that line's probably expendable anyway. And to their point, I think they're close to playoffs. If they get 5 offensive, well, I'd say bowling's good. You get 4 offensive linemen between now and September. I think they are a playoff contender. I don't know if they do that, depending on how the draft shakes out and what they do in free agency. But he's also someone that he isn't a horrible blocker too when he's on the line. I mean, he's not. I don't know if I'd put him as good as Gresham was, and as much as people hated Gresham for various reasons as a receiver, he was a very good blocker. I would have to go back and look and see how he rates with Croft. I know when he came out of college, Croft was considered a good blocker. So I don't know if that's what the Bengals are thinking. Hey, we'd prefer Croft because this might be it too. We want a guy who can stay in line and block because our offensive line isn't that good. So we're just going to put 6 against 3 or 6 against 4 to make up for not having good tackles. You hope that's not the case, because then you have fewer people going out for passes. But I would hope they would at least make some sort of attempt to keep Eifert and not just say, yeah, you're good, but thank you, we're moving on.
Yeah. And I don't mean to cut you off, but there was, for those of you, and you can read into this as much or as little as you want, but for those of you who are on social media, Tyler Eifert had an Instagram post where I think it was a video where he was at a local, and this is this is like a couple of weeks ago. He was at a local high school basketball game with Jonathan Hayes, the tight end coach with the Bengals. That tells me, and I think Eifert would kind of say, yeah, I'd like to be back with the Bengals. That tells me that, yeah, the guy wants to be there. And as little of a sign as that is, I mean, he's hanging out with his position coach at a local Cincinnati area high school, catching a basketball game in the offseason right before free agency. That tells me that, he's not doing the Jeremy Hill where he tweets goodbye to Cincinnati. I mean, he's hanging out in the area and wants to stay. So, and that's not always the case with Bengals players and some of their better players, which Eifert is when he's healthy. I guess the last question I want to ask you on this topic, Scott, is if they let Eifert walk, how confident are you in the Bengals employing Tyler Croft, CJ Uzama, Mason Schreck, who was on IR last year, and Ryan Hewitt, who's kind of their H-back? I mean, that's unless they, go out and get another guy, those are kind of the guys that they would have in that tight end H-back type of group. Now, how confident are you in that group without Eifert in the picture?
Well, first I'll say, I hope they just don't let Eifert go, because this is a team that refuses to let Adam Jones go.
Yeah.
And if you keep Adam Jones, why are you letting Eifert go? Eifert seems to be nothing but a great player, great person, as far as we can tell from the outside. That being said, if they do let him go, if he does walk, if someone does throw a ton of money at him, the Bengals can't justify. You are losing a potentially great tight end when he's there, but I don't think it's a deal breaker if they get the blocking. And the reason I say that is you have a great running back in Joe Mixon, who they seem to be implying is going to be their bell cow. You have a very good Giovanni Bernard there, who showed he has, obviously a lot of life left last year in what he did. So you have a good running tandem. You have a decent quarterback when he has weapons around him. You still have AJ Green. In theory, your wide receivers could be really good depending on, what happens to John Ross. If he can step it up, Tyler Boyd will be entering his 3rd year. He has some ability. You have, these younger players stepping in. So it could be you may not need to have that great tight end as a wide receiver or as a receiver because you have these other people, and Bernard and Mixon's running backs can both catch out of the backfield, and they catch very well. So you've got great running backs that can catch very well. You have an elite wide receiver. You have some young guys who, if they fulfill the potential that you hoped when you drafted them in the second round with Boyd and 9th overall with Ross, you would hope to think that we could overcome that. And then Crofton is in his own right as a tight end isn't a horrible one. I mean, he's not Eifert, but he's not Daniel Coates. He's a decent, solid guy who seems to be able to block and catch. He had 7 touchdown receptions last year. So obviously he is a guy they can use in the end zone. He's a guy who can make plays. And then you mentioned some of the other guys. I don't know what they see with Uzama and Shrek. Shrek was seemed like one of those flyers with a late pick. So it'd be interesting to see if he's on the roster next year. Uzama 2 years ago seemed like the guy they were going to go with. And then last year, I think his receptions dropped from like 25 to 10 as Croft kind of took over that role. So, but I think Croft would probably be the main guy going forward. I think it'd be a step down, but not a huge step down. And I think that drop could be made up for what they have potentially at wide receiver and at running back.
So Tyler Eifert in his career, granted he's a couple of years older than in terms of seasons accrued than Croft and CJ Uzama. Eifert has 20 total touchdowns, twice as much in his 20 career touchdowns. Tyler Croft and CJ Uzama have 10 combined in their respective careers. So twice as many touchdown catches. Obviously, many of them, 13 of them, I believe, were in that outstanding 2015 season. But there's no doubt when he's out there, he's a dominant player. It's just that if and when he is out there. Big question for the Bengals this offseason. Obviously, their biggest name free agent to be this year. And if you're not going to spend the money on Tyler Eifert, you better spend it somewhere. I mean, that's kind of my opinion. And it better be on a guy who can come in, contribute, potentially start, and really help your team out. Because if you're not willing to pay a big contract to a player that went to a Pro Bowl a couple of years ago for you, you're going to need to spend that money somewhere in order to not only improve your football team, but improve morale of your own team, improve fan morale, because sitting on your hands and continuing to let your best and former Pro Bowl players walk is, to me, is not a way to endear yourself to the fans and not a way to improve your football team. What do you guys think? There's a lot of comments in the YouTube chat. It seems like a lot of people are they do like Croft. I think everybody can agree that I'm seeing comments from Joe Johnson, Michael Myers, and others in the live YouTube chat that are, kind of saying they like Croft. They like him, don't love him, and I think that's the thing with Eifert. You love him when he's there, but there's a lot of times you don't like him because he's not there. But I personally hope that the Bengals re-sign him. I'm kind of for the franchise tag at this point. I am not opposed to overpaying him a tiny bit. If you need to, and giving it one more year to see if you can really get something big out of him. And like I said, if you're not going to pay him, that better go to an offensive lineman or somewhere in free agency that's going to help your team. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is Scott Schultze. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and CincyJungle.com. We are also reachable via email, theobinsider@gmail.com, and via Twitter at BengalsOBI. We've got a couple of listener questions we are going to get to. We're going to try and get to maybe one or two more in the live YouTube chat if you have some. So leave those in the live chat. We'll be monitoring that. Scott, the first is from a gentleman. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I do want to give a shout out to somebody, and it is they left us a nice message on YouTube. One of our past episodes. It says, "Hey guys." It says the username is Elena Hernandez, but it says it's Les from Louisiana. Hey guys, love your channel. This is Les from Louisiana. I'm a huge Bengals fan, but like you, Anthony, my loyal following was tested to the max these past few years. Very crappy football by the Bengals. Anyway, my thoughts on the upcoming draft are as follows. take a super fast, and trust me, he'll be he'll be a Pro Bowler by a year or two. Yeah, well, whatever about that on John Ross. Take the linebacker from Georgia, Roquan Smith. He's going to be special. Another pick for me would be the quarterback from Wyoming, Josh Allen. Reminds me of Carson Wentz. Love the show, Les from Louisiana. So I just kind of wanted to let him have his thoughts there and, pat ourselves on the back because, it's always nice to do that to ourselves there. So thanks, Les, for the comment. The next email we had was from Jackson, who wrote, we've got a lot of people who are into themselves tonight. I'm a Bengals fanatic / sports genius, and I would like you to write an article. Well, we're not going to write an article, at least not now. We're going to talk about it on the program, talking about why the Bengals should draft Riley Ferguson out of Memphis in the late rounds. Also, do you believe the Bengals should draft Shaquem Griffin? I believe Shaquem Griffin that's the young man who doesn't have a hand, right?
Is that guy?
Yeah.
Is he a linebacker or something?
Yeah, he's kind of a tweener guy who let's see. It's that young man who went to Central Florida. He had a crazy 2016 season where he had 20 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks. Followed that up last year with 13.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks. Now, obviously, you hate to point out a handicap, but that's a pretty big handicap. Yes, he got it done at the college level. UCF is a good football program. I don't know if it's necessarily a true college football powerhouse. I would not be opposed to giving the kid a shot. It's a matter of draft value and all of that. It's unfortunate that you have to talk about that, but that's kind of the situation, right, Scott?
Yeah, and I mean it obviously, it looks like it would be a challenge, but you go to baseball. I mean, Jim Abbott obviously worked really well for him. Yep. And that was, a different sport, but, he still had the added challenge of, shifting the glove from one hand to the other to catch it and field it, and seemed to do that very well for many years as a pro. And that many people were kind of hesitant. Well, can this guy make it? Same thing with this guy. You look at the numbers that you mentioned, all the sacks and tackles for a loss, he's obviously getting it done. The big question would be, obviously, wrapping up and some of those with the bigger, more powerful players. But it's not too different than you see some of the guys sometimes when they have the injuries or have the cast on their hand and it's all wrapped up and they have like these big clubs in their hand because, they have an injury, but they're playing through it. So, you see it every Sunday. There's always some guy on some team who has a wrap like that on his hand. So he only has, one hand to really, grab with. And it seems to work for them. That being said, he's probably going to fall lower than you would expect him to based on production and based on, how he grades out the combine, what his spark score is, whatever, all that because of this. And, you don't have a guy like this in the NFL. So it does raise a question and teams are going to be hesitant, but I don't think you should try from altogether. I think, if you think he's a great value and he's there in a round or, a couple rounds lower than maybe you think he should grade out at and you want him, I don't see a reason why they, should turn away from him just because of that. And we do have a need at linebacker. And if that's what I haven't seen his combine numbers, but as he measures that, obviously if he's smaller, like a, safety in the box, I think Williams and Iloka probably are decent enough to cover that. And you do want to use a high pick on a couple guys who already do that fairly well. But if he, is a true linebacker, that's obviously a need. That's something that they could look at, possibly get good value in the draft too.
Yeah, he's kind of listed as an outside linebacker, but just because of his kind of the Carl Lawson thing in that, he's kind of listed. He was listed as a linebacker, but he's technically an edge rusher. So, what do you think about Riley Ferguson, Scott?
I am going to have to look him up real quick. He is the quarterback, correct?
From Memphis, yes.
Okay. Yeah, off the top of my head, as of right now, I have no comment other than it's Lent. So I just say I gave that up for Lent.
Okay. All right.
I'm back with you.
Okay. Well, he's probably a day 2 possibly early day 3 pick, but a guy with a lot of tools. And, some people love him, some people don't. There are other quarterbacks that are in that mid-round range that I would prefer over.
He isn't the guy from the Senior Bowl that had the incredible week, is he? The guy from the small college. Was that East Coast?
You might. This quarterback's from Memphis, so yeah.
I think I'm thinking someone else.
Okay, yeah. So, I think the Bengals need a backup. Need to probably draft a quarterback this year because it looks like AJ McCarron's going to be gone. So, by the way, we probably should have talked about that a little bit, but he's gone, and he's set to be an unrestricted free agent. So that's kind of what that is there. Let's move on, Scott. John Telly, good friend of the program here. Kind of a long email, but really the gist of it is Bengals fans are really. Hold on, I guess I'm a little staticky. Let me. That's why we do live shows. I hope this is better. But Scott,
much better.
Okay, good. John Telly said that essentially Bengals fans are really, really psyched about the Frank Pollock replacing Paul Alexander thing. Yet, shortly after Paul Alexander, he wasn't fired. He was allowed to leave. His contract was up. He goes to the Cowboys where Frank Pollock went, and he notes the SB Nation Cowboy site and whatnot, saying that fans are actually pretty excited about the Paul Alexander thing and how he could potentially help their offense. So I guess his question is, how can their view of the swap of coaches be so different from ours? Have they noticed what's been happening to Dalton? And really, is Alexander's issues? Are we overblowing them? And is it just the team didn't invest enough in some of their core offensive linemen, and that's the crux of the problem? Or maybe Cowboys fans are just saying this guy, they just kind of look at it on paper and say, oh, this guy's a pretty good coach.
Yeah, I really can't come up with a good way to justify any positive evaluation of him. But how many fans really follow in depth other teams' assistant coaches? So clearly they probably don't know a whole lot about him. I'm sure the Cowboys website has probably spun him in a positive light, looking at, hey, he had Andrew Whitworth, or hey, he was there when, Will Anderson were there. Yeah, that's great. Over that many years, you can find a few positive things to say that, hey, when they used a really high pick on a guy, he was generally good because he was good. But they're probably not looking at the fact that he never developed any late players. He was horrible at player evaluations, getting centers, interior linemen. There's a litany of issues with and the line just seems to have progressively gotten worse since 2005. Every year it just seems to have gotten a little bit to the point where, what we've seen the last couple of years, it was just awful. And, they gave him the 2 high picks, the first, 2 picks in the draft a couple years ago, and they use them on Oboihe and, Jake Fisher. They trade up for Bodine, something the Bengals have only done like 3 or 4 times in their history of, 50 years. He's been a total disaster. They continue to stand by him. And we saw late last year that when they put in the backups, they seem to be better than the starters, as far as some of them guys like Alex Redmond and guys who weren't getting a chance. So it's very hard as a Bengals fan to see anything Alexander has done over the last 5, 6, 7 years and say there's anything positive. The Cowboys, obviously, their fans have not seen any of that. I'm guessing most Cowboys fans don't follow the Bengals that closely to see why so many Bengals fans were cheering when this guy was no longer made the offensive line coach, and seeing how good the Cowboys line has become under Pollock. It kind of makes you wonder, well, why are they so happy to see another coach in there? You would think if they lost a guy that was good, they'd be disappointed. I mean, if we lost a very good coach, a very good player, if we lost AJ Green and replaced him with some run-of-the-mill guy, I don't think we'd be celebrating saying, wow, this run-of-the-mill guy we got's awesome. We'd be saying, man, this still sucks that we lost AJ Green. So I don't know if the Cowboys fans just didn't like Paul Lake, if they're delusional, what it is, but there's really nothing I can see as a Bengals fan that would be a positive with Alexander as head coach. And he goes into a great situation. They already have a great line. So all he has to do is keep it from becoming sucky. And
yeah, I mean, maybe it's a mutually beneficial thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, maybe Alexander's time has run its course with the Bengals, and maybe there's too many failed experiments, too many guys that were high picks that have not developed properly. But, if Cowboys fans did their homework on who Paul Alexander is, they would see Willie Anderson under his watch, who made Pro Bowls. They would see Eric Steinbach, who was a good player under his watch, Richie Bram, Bobby Williams, Andre Smith turned into a decent player for a handful of years. Levi Jones was a fringe Pro Bowl player, Andrew Whitworth. So, I mean, they probably see a number of players that were, very good players. And they said, wow, this guy at least kind of knows what he's doing. And, he's got 3 All-Pros on that line. Like you mentioned, Travis Frederick and Tyron Smith and Zach Martin. And, he falls into a good situation. And maybe the Bengals, just based on their personnel, based on a message getting stale in their locker room and that position room, needed a new voice, needed a guy with a fresh perspective, and comes from a place where their line was very good. And it's just mutually beneficial, and that's okay. If it was within the division, it wouldn't be as okay. But, maybe that's okay. Thanks for the question there, John. We'll get out of here with one more here, Scott. It's from Joe Johnson in the live chat. And we talked about this player earlier when we talked to Rebecca. What are the chances Quentin Nelson falls to us? I really only see the Broncos and Bucks are threats to take him before us, and that would be a massive upgrade to our run game. Obviously, that would be a dream get for the Bengals, as it kind of depends now. Because if you follow, I believe it's Charles Robinson on Twitter. If you follow him, he really did a nice thread of a number of big name players and how they measured out at the initial measurements at the combine. And one thing that really stuck out to me was Quentin Nelson's measurements almost look like a prototypical left tackle in terms of hand size, wingspan, arm length, height, weight, all of that. Obviously, he's looks like an all-pro guard already, but he looks like a guy that could play tackle. We heard Rebecca say, talk about Duke Tobin's comments about they think he could play any position on the line. So it depends on that. It depends on how quarterback happy teams get in that top 10. So, I mean, I think if a team really viably thinks he could play tackle or guard, then I think he's a guy that will not fall to the Bengals. I don't know. What do you think, Scott? I mean, I think a guard at 12 could easily be, if teams mostly view him as a guard, he I don't want to say he could easily be there, but he could be available at 12.
Yeah, I think if he's seen as a guard only entering the league, there's a possibility. I just went back and checked over the last decade in the draft, looking at top 15 picks. There have been 4 players drafted who entered the draft as a interior lineman, either guard or center, who were taken in the first 15 picks. In 2013, there was Jonathan Cooper and Chance Warmack, who were taken at 7 and 10. Mike Pouncey in 2011 was taken at 15, and then Brandon Albert, who I think switched to tackle but entered the draft as a guard in 2008, was the number 15 pick. So if they view this guy as a guard only, but an incredible guard, especially with it being a passing league where the emphasis is, hey, we need the left tackle, we need the blocking, we need the skill players, the center of the guard, the defensive tackle, the big nose tackle. Those positions don't have the same value they did. The big thumper in the middle on defense, you have something like that where it can be depressed a little bit, that you could see someone like him fall. Now, if they do see him as a as a tackle or a tackle/guard where he could do both, or do a Whitworth thing where you come in the league and start right away at guard with the idea of, hey, we're going to make him this, the left tackle of our future, right tackle of our future, then I think his value jumps way up and he's probably off the board. But if he's a guard, it was 5 years ago when the Bengals drafted Kevin Zeitler. David DeCastro, if you recall, heading into the draft was the best guard prospect since Steve Hutchinson, can't miss. He's a generational guard. He's a top 10 pick for sure. No way anyone lets him fall. He falls all the way to the Bengals at 17, who need a guard. They pass on it. He falls back to them at 21. They pass on him again. And he fell all the way to 24, whatever he fell, where the Steelers grabbed him. And I remember, in the live chat that we had on Cincy Jungle, everyone's just like, grab him. And he just kept falling and falling. And it just kind of shows, the devaluation of some of those positions in it's not like it was 10 years ago where your running backs are all going to get 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns and you're going to run. And, those interior offensive, defensive positions don't have the same value they did. So, and on draft day, you never know. I think the biggest factor is how many of those quarterbacks go before the Bengals pick. I mean, if you see Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen and Darnold and Rosen and, throw another one, if they all go before the Bengals, and then you throw in some of those other elite players, those Saquon Barkley and some of those other guys off the board, it's very possible this guy could be there when the Bengals pick at number 12, but you just need those kind of things to happen. Or the other thing that would be really beneficial is somehow between me or you, maybe Rebecca can get a photo or something. We need to get a photo of him posted on the internet right as the draft starts of him smoking weed.
The old Laramie Tunsil.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. Yeah. Well, I don't want to.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're going to do that.
That's pretty funny though.
But that would be a possibility to make it happen.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think he could be there. You never know. Last year, the Bears moved up one spot to get a quarterback. The Chiefs moved way up to get a quarterback. So, I mean, teams can get, and Joe, the listener who asked the question, referenced the Broncos and the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers don't need a quarterback. They're set with Jameis Winston, but the Broncos do. So they very well could try and get their quarterback and not, bypass an offensive lineman till later in the draft or what have you. But they could also, go after Kirk Cousins, go after some of those guys that are out there in the free agent market once again, if they, so it just depends. I think that if he's viewed as a true guard, there is a decent chance he'll get there at number 12. I think if teams start looking at him as more of a tackle guard hybrid or initial guard future tackle, then I think it's going to take a move up. And Duke Tobin in the interviews today did say, it's going to be hard for 11 guys to make the team this year, and with 11 picks, it gives you flexibility to potentially move up. Blah blah blah. We'll see. Yeah, I mean the Bengals do that so often, but there's no doubt though that the Bengals need to go offensive line with one of their two picks, if not both. I think, and that depends on what they do in free agency and everything. But that needs to be the pick. And last year's draft, I've said this before on this program, last year's draft was more about flash, speed. You got Mixon and Malone and Ross and the pass rushers and all that. I think this is going to be more of a meat and potatoes kind of draft. Linebackers, defensive tackles, offensive linemen, maybe a kicker, just kind of some different things. Maybe not as sexy of picks, but I think that's what it's going to be. Thanks for the questions tonight, folks. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to get out of here. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, cincyjungle.com, and you can get in touch with us at Bengals OBI on Twitter and the OB Insider at gmail.com via email. Scott, any final thoughts before we bounce out, my friend?
No, just I'm enjoying the weather, and yeah, it's kind of nice to not have negative 15 outside with stuff blowing when we're talking, and it's hard to believe it's been the draft is the combine is already here, and I'm guessing before too long, it's hard to believe we're going to be talking about the draft, and not just upcoming, but I think it's hard. It's almost been a year that we were, I think doing this podcast during the first round of the draft and watching them grab John Ross, and a year later we're still waiting to see if he can play in the NFL.
Yep. Yeah. And I think at the time I was pretty excited about the pick, but obviously the year played out the way it did, and hopefully he's going to get on the right track pretty soon here, and the Bengals give him the opportunity if he is on the right track. So yeah. Well, thanks to Rebecca Toback of SB Nation and Cincy Jungle to come on tonight and share some of her experiences at the Combine. Appreciate that, Scott. Thanks for coming on tonight, and all of your great insight as usual. Before I say goodbye, you got one more thing.
Yeah, one thing has popped in my head that I think we need to do. Since we were talking to Rebecca, talking about the Combine, maybe by next time we meet, we need to decide what our attributes are. Like, as a podcast host, do you have sand in your pants, or what would be a good way to describe Anthony Kazent?
I like it. Yeah. I like it. There's one that I'm thinking of by Mayock that I absolutely loved, and I can't seem to think of it at the top of my head. So I'll have to find some Mayockisms, if you will, or a Kuiperism to come up with. But thanks for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening and tuning in live. We'll see you next episode, and let's hope the Bengals scout some good players while they're in Indianapolis. Thanks.